This is Smarter Sourcing, a show dedicated to helping sourcing and procurement leaders elevate their influence and get their seat at the table. Our mission is to empower listeners to reimagine their roles and make that happen. In each episode, we'll speak with an innovative leader to distill best practices, learn from their mistakes, and leave you with actionable insights that you can immediately put to work. Here's your host, executive producer for Smarter Sourcing, John Pavia. Now let's jump right into today's episode.
And welcome everyone to this episode of Smarter Sourcing. My name is John Pavia, and today we are joined by Brent Kellett, Senior Director, Group Sourcing Lead for JLL's Financial Services Division. Brent, thanks for doing this today.
Thanks for having me, John.
So JLL, by the way, does anybody ever call it Jones Lang LaSalle anymore? Because now it used to be Jones Lang LaSalle. Now everybody I meet, it's just JLL.
It is. And I think some years ago, before I joined JLL, my understanding is the branding changed. And so it's simply JLL today. Yeah.
Where are you located geographically right now?
I am in Colorado Springs, Colorado. My family and I moved out here about 6 years ago from the Chicago area, born and raised in Chicagoland. Love Chicago, but we just love the lifestyle here and we're set. We're set for life, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I was just out there. I absolutely love Colorado. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your journey and how you got to, you were in this, I think, Cushman Wakefield before this. And so you've been in this space for a while, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in the semiconductor business, doing just, tactical buying, logistics, warehousing for a small firm that refurbished semiconductor equipment. From there, I was given an opportunity because at that time I lived in Arizona. My wife actually had an opportunity to go to nursing school in Chicago. And so we had moved out to Chicago for that. As part of that process, I was able to secure a position as a commodity manager, they called it at the time, which is now called category manager for Siemens, their water technologies division at the time. And so I basically cut my teeth in sourcing procurement there from a strategic point of view. And then from there, I had a desire to go into some, procurement consulting. I wanted to convert to more of the client-facing aspects of sourcing procurement. So I moved into essentially a house that did, e-auction services for clients, Fortune 500 clients. And I tell you, that was a great experience for me in terms of how to interact with clients, how to sell services, if you will. And so that was an interesting journey. From there, I moved into a company at the time called Procurement, which is now called Accenture. So Accenture bought out Procurement during the time I was there, and into their business process outsourcing practice, doing sourcing and procurement for clients. Again, I was a account lead. So I led some of the Fortune 500 clients in terms of bringing forth, indirect procurement solutions, if you will. And then I did that, consulting and procurement outsourcing, especially in a competitive environment, can be a grueling job, right? It's a grind. And so, at that time I had done about 5 years of that. And my wife had finished up her nurse practitioning, degree and license. And so we just had our first child at that point in time. So I wanted to just take a breath. And so I'd made a decision to be a stay-at-home father for about a year and a half while my wife was launching her career, which was a great break. I think I would absolutely recommend that. I think that historically, I would say, typically when you look at a resume, you don't want to see gaps in, your potential candidates' work career, but that's sort of a misconception in my mind. I think, being a stay-at-home father really helped me gain perspective and obviously give that quality time to my son. From there, I found an opportunity, a former colleague of mine from consulting, to join the category management practice at Cushman & Wakefield. I started out as a category manager, was promoted to director of category management. I was tasked with hiring a team of category managers to deliver all of our services across North America. And, again, that was another first-time experience for me in terms of getting into the IFM space. And I've been here ever since. So, that's kind of how I started in this space. I've held many roles within IFM sourcing and procurement, from category management to transitions, transformations, new client onboarding, and then ultimately transitioned to the account side, where I led one of our largest tech clients from a sourcing procurement perspective for about 4 to 5 years. And then JLL had taken over that contract from that client. I transitioned as part of that, and here I am at JLL.
So the year off that you took for your son. So you and I have something in common. I didn't take a year off, but I was at the DA's office in New York the first year that they implemented a paternity leave. And, you are so right in terms of gaining perspective. It's something I never anticipated doing. And had my wife not said, you're doing it, I wouldn't have done it because I just never thought of myself as staying home with a baby ever. Because I need my father to do it. And this podcast has nothing to do with raising kids, but it does have to do with career development and whatnot for especially people in the sourcing procurement world.
Yeah.
And especially for dads, I think, to take some time, especially to raise one of your kids. It was a big surprise for me. It does. It gives you a lot of perspective.
Definitely. Yeah. I cherish that time always. I always think about that time and how fun it was for me.
Well, it's funny. I shared the story with my 2 boys, 2 girls, and I was talking to we just happened to be out with our 2 sons, and now my oldest is 31. And I was telling the story, and I thought he had heard it before. And I was telling him how much I dreaded the thought of doing this. I applied for it because my wife said, hey, you got this program, you got to do it. And I did it reluctantly. And he was like, what do you mean you did it reluctantly? You started getting offended. And I'm like, hold on, wait till the end of the story. But I was being honest with them.
Yeah.
You form ideas based on what you see your parents do. And my father was never the stay-at-home dad type. But anyway, so the other thing you said in that intro was being in the consulting / indirect procurement world when you were procuring and how it was grueling. Why is that? And I think that's a very interesting topic, not one that we normally talk about, but for the third-party consultants to come in on the indirect procurement side, I agree. I think it is grueling, but I'd like to know why you think so.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is, there's high demand for delivery with our clients, of course, because we sell our expertise. We sell our speed to market in terms of how we run projects. And we sell, this leverage strategy where we have, a multitude of clients. We work with all these different vendors. We have the leverage to bring value, right? Versus a single client may not necessarily have that. So with all that being said, there's a lot of pressure to deliver and you're constantly traveling, you're on the road. And so I would say that would be the most grueling part of it.
So you have a consistent thread, as I read through your bio, and really driving interesting solutions, but all, driving savings, driving quality. Do you have a sourcing strategy that you've sort of brought from place to place that it drives consistent value?
Yeah. You have your typical tools like your sourcing planning, your different strategies you can drive from, supplier rationalization to scope work standardization, et cetera. But I think what's key is how you interact with people and how you can influence people, especially at the executive levels on down. So for me, too often we find with our clients in particular, there's not early involvement in getting sourcing at the table, right? So a lot of times what you'll find coming into an organization that's hiring us is that procurement is at the last stage in the process. Now, some of our Fortune 500s recognize the strategic value of procurement, which is great. It makes it easier for us, right? Because the culture change is already there. And so, getting early involvement is key at the front end of the buy process. That's what I have found has been the most consistent strategy to deliver value, because you can develop a strategy in a vacuum, right? But if you're not sharing it with anyone because you came until the end, then it doesn't matter and you're not gaining influence to drive change. So I think sourcing procurement is in a unique position in the last 10, 15 years in that we've been able to come to the table at the C level on down and, show organizations that value that we deliver just outside of cost, right? And so for me, that is the consistent thing.
How much do you think the pandemic and the disruption in the supply chain helped to bring, especially the indirect procurement guys, up the chain and into the C-suite where they're talking to senior management and part of senior?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I think for me, during the pandemic, I was actually on I mentioned before, a tech client, and both with Cushman and JLL. And I was there during that period. And, this tech client, which is essentially a giant in the industry, it was interesting because before COVID hit, they didn't consider cost as a number one priority. And so we maximize our value from IFM perspective by way of delivering quality of services and uplifting services to, say, the gold standard, if you will. And that's what they expected. Once COVID hit, leadership changed on both our side and their side to some degree. And then, priorities changed. The CFO all of a sudden became front and center on the client side to say, we need to be cost conscious here. What are we doing? And so that trickled down to, all the outsourced partners that they had, including us, to say, what are you going to do for me to deliver value? So we ended up going from, a delivery model where quality was number one priority to cost and, being cost conscious, finding operational efficiencies in particular while delivering seamless services was the priority. By the way, you got to deliver X amount of $1 million of savings now every year, right? So it was a nice change for me because I appreciate that given my background. And I was like, okay, now I can truly deliver my value based on my experience, right? And so it was a game changer, honestly, for me. And I gained a lot of trusted partnerships at the client because of it. So yeah, I would say that was a great example of a change that occurred during COVID.
You spent, I think, a fair amount of your time on facilities maintenance procurement, correct? So that's an area that I have some familiarity with. It was always hard when we're trying to explain how you show value in the facility maintenance space, because you can have a client who, they're pushing things off and they're deferring a lot of maintenance that things that should be getting fixed. You come in, you're now managing the process, and you're trying to explain to them how, look, you brought down the hourly rates, you brought down the durations, but there are things that weren't getting fixed before you got there. Now they're getting fixed on a regular basis. So at a raw cost basis, from a CFO's perspective, they're spending the same on facilities, maybe even more. You're trying to show them that you're bringing value by lowering the hourly rate, lowering the durations, lowering the amount of trips.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the one area of indirect procurement that I think is a tough one to get a client's head around, whether they're an internal stakeholder or you're a consultant and you're third party and the client. How would you manage through that?
Yeah. Indirect in general, as you mentioned, whether it be in facilities or other areas, I would say cost avoidance in the indirect space is as or more important, not more, I should say as important as cost savings, especially with certain categories of service. But in general, I think for us to come in and show our value, but have, say, the bottom line still says the same, figure, if you will, it's about that total cost of ownership. So when you pull together, say, an analysis on HVAC services and you say, look, there's a lot of waste in process here from an operations perspective. And this is where it's important to be cross-functional with your other business functions. So I would work with, say, engineering that was on the account that's doing those evaluations for efficiency from an energy, hours spent, technicians doing work, et cetera, and pulling from them the value that delivers, right? And so there's recognizable savings in and of that operational efficiency, such that if you can frame it up for the client to say, look, you're going to be spending the same or more money, but this is what you're going to get out of it. You're going to get out of it energy savings. You're going to get out of it, better services, because we may either decide to self-perform kind of the PM inspections or what have you, or we might do a hybrid between self-perform, subcontract, but you're going to have more reliable services from the standpoint of setting up, robust contract KPIs, SLAs with our vendors. You're going to ask for continuous improvement initiatives, innovations, that sort of thing. So it's about bringing all that to the table and being able to quantify it to show that value for the client.
You spent, I'm sure, a lot of your career where you're brought in and now you're working with an internal stakeholder, right? Whether it's JLL, Cushman, and sometimes a stakeholder that his or her people have done the procurement. And now, even though you're working on the same team, you're now being seconded or assigned to now manage the procurement process for some internal EVP or SVP and their team. But talk to us a little bit about some experiences you've had and some strategies you've had to build relationships with your stakeholders, because you live in a world where you need executive sponsorship, because if you don't have it, even the people at the mid-level of any company, they can make your life miserable.
Yeah, 100%, John. I think, especially with, I would call it first generation outsourcing environments where we're the first outsourced partner that they may have had over the years. I find this a lot in my financial services banking clients. Yeah, there's an existing procurement organization there. They want to feel like they have value, right, through this sort of outsourcing process. And so for me, I think about a couple of things. One is, how you build that relationship with those existing stakeholders to, find their interests, right? Find out what's important to them, find out what their value sets are. Also, understanding what the baseline operations looks like. So how do they procure services today? what strategies are they using? Where are they having issues with supplier performance? Find ways in which you can actually help them. And, I was taught at an early stage of my career when I first started consulting, it's not about you. It's not about what you deliver as an outsourcer. It's about, helping them with the strategies such that it makes them look good, right?
And make them look good.
Yeah. And so we want to build that rapport. So you have to kind of bring them into the fold, into your processes and make them part of it. It's not easy and it doesn't always work, but that would be my approach, taking it from an empathy point of view. You kind of refer back to my learning and development training days is, being empathetic to their wants and needs in their career.
So tell us a little bit about how JLL is structured from an indirect procurement. I mean, you guys are all over the map in terms of, all over the globe, literally. So how are you structured as an organization?
Yeah, a great question. I wish I had the statistics on how many employees. So I don't want to throw out a number there, but it's a massive organization. But I would say starting at the chief procurement officer level on down, we have the next level down from our chief procurement is we obviously have our, client sourcing side of the business, which is what I work with. And then you have, your corporate procurement, which is what JLL buys for their own facilities and just indirects in general, marketing, all of those traditional indirect spaces. Speaking about the client source organization, which is the largest part of the function globally, we have what's called divisional sourcing directors. Divisional sourcing directors oversee a vertical of clients. So for example, I'm in financial services vertical. We have a bunch of different verticals. And that setup is consistent across the globe. Obviously, in region, other countries, there's, different roles and responsibilities depending on the need of the clients in those regions. But that's generally the structure. And then, down to the divisional sourcing directors, it's your group sourcing leads like myself that oversee a portfolio of clients to drive value, client growth, client retention, really focusing on, I'll say the solutions development side of the business from a sourcing procurement perspective. And then from there, you have your traditional procurement sourcing leads, strategic sourcing specialists, and, operational leads, contract administrators, et cetera. So that's essentially how we're structured globally. I was actually on a call yesterday with Australia because we're trying to implement some culinary services in APAC. And we were speaking with our, operational colleagues over there. And, it's fun for me because I get to learn about their culture, how they, conduct business. And what I'm finding actually, it's very similar. So it seems to be fairly streamlined across the organization, at least from a sourcing and procurement lens and how we transition and implement new business.
So being that you have a perspective, and what I mean by that is a global perspective where you're having conference calls with your colleagues that within JLL that are literally all over the globe, give us an idea of how JLL is utilizing the latest technology, especially AI, but anything else that I think people would be interested in hearing about.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things from a technology perspective that we're trying to push both in, sourcing procurement and CRE in general is the use of BI tools, business intelligence tools. And, that's a technology. It's been around for some time, but there's been advancements, especially in the CRE space. And so we have a tool actually we're rolling out right now called Zara that across the organization, we're obviously in the process of implementing it. That is a tool that helps you look at more real-time data from the standpoint of not only sourcing and procurement operations, but also I would say IFM, operations. You take a building and you look at how it's being utilized from an energy operations, data monitoring, et cetera. And it pulls those data points and it can give you real-time feedback on how to solution things both reactively and preventatively. Preventatively is the new way, right? Predictive analysis. And so that's going to be a key tool for us. And it is being, implemented globally. I would say the other technology piece that I find for us very useful is, we have all these different tools in sourcing, from contract lifecycle management tool to our spend management tools to our work order management tools, which is more on the operations side that integrate. There's a tool that we implemented some years ago where it sits on top of these different technologies, tools, and brings it all together. So they all basically speak to each other. And so that's created a lot of efficiency in process. Still working out some of the kinks were in the first couple of years of it, but it's been a game changer for me in terms of how we run procurement operations.
Same with technology. What are you seeing? What are you guys doing in utilizing technology when it comes to your vendor management. And I hear more and more people I speak with, especially since the worldwide disruption that was caused in the pandemic, really having sophisticated plans of redundancy throughout their supplier base. And that's become a big part of their technology play.
Yeah.
So how about what are you guys doing?
Yeah. So from a supplier management perspective, I would say, I'll start with supplier performance management and the way that we manage, the performance of our vendors. I would say we have a strong lead at the moment at the platform that's rolling out a standard for how we measure supplier performance, both in the US and across the globe. Historically, we would have a standard based on the vertical or accounts or who's leading that account. This is now a standard that we're rolling out, and it's going to capture all the elements of supplier performance management from cost, quality, delivery, innovation, so on and so forth, to kind of bring the full scope of supplier performance as a standard to our clients. And so you ask about the redundancy aspect of things. I think, if you look at the disruption in the market today from a supply chain perspective, especially with tariffs now and things like that, there's different levels of the supply chain that are impacted sooner versus later. And so, if you talk to someone in manufacturing, the disruption is immediate, right? If you talk to somebody in, facility management services like us, we're a bit further down the supply chain, so it's not as impactful immediately, but there is some impacts that we try to prepare for, and we really partner with our preferred vendors to help us come up with those mitigation strategies to the point where they're giving us monthly updates on, how, say, the tariff impacts are trickling down into how they buy consumables as part of their delivery of service to us. How they, if we're talking about buying HVAC equipment, how the steel market has been affected, things of that nature. And we also have a healthy set of resources internally that report on these things just, from a global perspective. And we'll bring these folks on our client calls and talk through those impacts. So we have a lot of resources at our disposal to help with those mitigation strategies and tactics. But I would say facility management is further down the supply chain, so it's not as disruptive, I'd say, as other industries.
So, and staying with that for a second, and it's also managing risk, but managing waste when you're, double paying a supplier or one part of JLL's or multiple divisions of JLL or using the same supplier, not really leveraging your size and spend. What's the quickest way for you after all these years? I'm sure you've had many stories, many experiences where you're like, oh my God, we've been spending way too much on such and such. And you don't want to make that same mistake again. And you do, or you inherit a new group that you're now managing. You're finding areas of waste. And especially in a big organization like yours, what's the quickest way, the most effective strategy you found in identifying waste and, overspending as early as you can?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I have a lot of experience with this, especially when new account transitions. So I was in my transitions and transformations role at Cushman. I would have to stand up new accounts. And so you're seeing a lot of waste in process with our clients, especially first generation outsourcers. So I would say the first thing you notice, which is an easy conversion for us, is the technology platforms that we bring from a rec to payment process. So the client might have a very manual or an outdated process today in terms of how they manage rec to payment with vendors. We implement our technology platform to, process invoices, rec to payment, our work order system management, how it speaks to our contract lifecycle management, making sure that from a compliance and risk perspective that all those things are in place prior to issuing that first work order. That's the most immediate efficiency I see in terms of mitigating waste. But for me, the area I play in is developing sourcing strategies, right? So I can look at a client spend data by category and tell right away how much we can reduce, like the number of suppliers they're using, for example, because I've done it for so many years. And I can tell them who are potentially the best vendors for their business, right? In that process, that 80-20 rule, if you will. So those are kind of the most immediate things that we can impact on. And, clients usually in our space are usually hesitant to, change vendors day one because they don't want to disrupt services, which makes sense. But there are other clients that want us to deliver our value day one. And so we say, okay, well, then we're going to have to rationalize your supply base day one by way of this process. In the long run, it's definitely more beneficial for our clients.
So before we run out of time, I got a bunch of light year on questions I want to ask you. So I'll start with this. What was your biggest aha moment in 2024?
Wow. Yeah. I would say for me, that was at a point where I was being promoted in talks of being promoted to the position I'm in now from the account side to our financial services division. And the biggest learning for me was the importance of succession planning. And so being a leader in procurement or leader in any organization in any capacity, you start to prioritize, people, management, growth, et cetera, bringing up folks, mentoring people. That becomes very important. And so that was my biggest learning, because I had a very strong sourcing lead on my account at the time that I was mentoring, if you will, and kind of bringing him along. And during that, it was great for me because I didn't have to go outside of my own bubble, right, if you will, to promote somebody. And I felt that this person was very qualified. So that succession planning for me is very important. Putting energy and focus in this is definitely recognizable, not only for yourself, but for the leaders in the organization. That they recognize when people are able to succession plan well, and it pays dividends later. So,
I've asked that question a bunch of times, never got that answer. That's a pretty cool answer. How about 2025? What's an initiative, a big, bold initiative that you can talk about that you're on somewhere on that journey right now with that initiative or about to launch it?
Yeah, I would say so. From an initiative perspective, there's a few things in the hopper. One is, there's a big emphasis, because traditionally procurement, they're not salespeople traditionally, right? There's only a handful of people that can come out of procurement and go into sales, for example. There's a big push right now for learning and development, specifically within our organization, about uplifting the skill sets of our sourcing people to essentially be, salespeople. So in other words, like, how well do you pitch, right? So we had a leadership meeting in Charlotte a few months ago, and one of the tasks that our leaders had to deliver in that session was we had to put together a mock pitch for clients. So if we had a client that was up for renewal, or we had a new pursuit that we were pursuing, we had to put together a 5-minute pitch, because usually in any client pitch, sourcing only gets about 5 minutes, right? So because there's so many other things to talk about from an operational perspective. So we had to put together a 5-minute pitch. And it was a great exercise. A lot of people were nervous, tense, like it was a lot of it, but it was a great exercise at the end of it. I think that is in a major niche for us. A couple other things for me, and again, getting back to that focus of, in my role now, I want to learn as much as I can on how JLL solutions for our clients, both in, procurement, sourcing, staffing, and support, and also uplifting our, subject matter expertise that say our more, regional, smaller clients. So I have a set of, 9 clients that I look after today, and a lot of more regional based clients. The perception is they don't necessarily get the attention that our larger clients do. So I'm trying to bring forth more of that expertise and uplift those services, coach and mentor the teams supporting those accounts, and then bridge the gap between what our platform can deliver and what the account delivers. Because frankly, our clients buy our platform, right? They buy the value, they buy the leverage, they buy the tools. So bridging those gaps is a key focus for me. And then the third piece is just looking at innovation from a technology perspective as it relates to how we can implement these cool new tools and processes that we're rolling out and make those part of a standard, if you will, for our internal stakeholders, right, to benefit from. So
those are some really cool insights. So you've got somebody starting in sourcing procurement, they're fresh out of college or at least very early in their career, and they're coming to your group. What's your advice for them in how to succeed in this kind of career now here in 2025 going forward?
Yeah, I love this question, John. And again, I learned this early on in my consulting roles. I was actually fortunate enough to sit through a seminar where we had a third party come in and teach us about building trusted partnerships. So I don't recall the 4 levels of partnerships today, but it starts at, say, the transactional level, service-based level, and then it builds up to trusted partnerships. And I was actually tasked after that seminar with building out for my clients at the time levels of trusted partnerships, scoring where I would rate each of my relationships with my client stakeholders. So getting back to your question, building those trusted partnerships should be an absolute focus, being cross-functional, being, a business partner that other folks can rely on, because then you get that seat at the table. As we talked about at the beginning, you get that early adoption of bringing procurement in first, because, if you build that trust, then they're going to say, hey, this, we want to bring you in now to talk through how we strategize, how we're spending our money. So that would be the one piece of advice I would give, a procurement professional coming in.
Before you were talking about having these pitch sessions, I was thinking about it. So it's a brilliant idea. And now combined with that last piece, which is building that relationship with the stakeholder. And I think about, I have 4 children, 21 and up. And, we all now live with bringing up our kids in a world where, everybody's addicted to their phone to some extent.
Yeah.
And the importance of effective communication, it's important no matter what field I think you're in. I don't care what you're doing, but you wouldn't think about it as, the first piece of advice you'd give to a young person coming into your group. But it really, going back to having everybody learn how to pitch, it's really like, go ahead, communicate to me. If you're a senior exec and you've got someone from indirect procurement and, they haven't been there for 20 years, they're sort of new. Explain to me, why should I let you do my procurement for me instead of just letting my people do it themselves, right? And I think it helps the person better understand, why am I here? What's my role? What I do affects the company from, a variety of ways, especially at the bottom line. Yeah, I think that's brilliant that you guys do that.
Yeah, and I thought it was really innovative. And the person that brought me into this role, she's, a wonderful, experienced mentor, and she has a strong reputation in our company of being able to pitch. And so she's one of the folks that, brought forth this innovative idea for the seminar. And so I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think more sourcing procurement people, as we get that seat at the table, because now we have folks at the C level, whereas, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have that. It's important for us to be client friendly and client facing. So yeah, it's absolutely critical skill set.
So Brent, this has been a really cool discussion. I really appreciate you doing this. And I know you told me this is your first podcast. You're like a pro. So some great insights, especially on the points of communication and stakeholder buy-in and whatnot. So I get out to Colorado now and again. I'd love to get together maybe in person, but thanks a lot for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, thanks for joining us. Look for our next episode of Smarter Sourcing. And for today, this is John Pavia. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Smarter Sourcing. For more episodes, visit www.smartersourcing.com or search Smarter Sourcing on your podcast platform of choice.